All right, ladies and gentlemen, here is the video for 7.6, factoring polynomials with a leading coefficient. So I want to remind you in 7.5, we were factoring polynomials that were in the form of x squared plus bx plus c. So polynomials with a leading coefficient of 1. So that's what we worked on yesterday. Today, we're going to add that leading coefficient. So now our formula is ax squared plus bx plus c. So just remember that whenever we're referring to a, b, or c, a is our first term, b is our second term, and c is our third term. So let's talk about the steps needed to complete this task. So notice step 1 says, if necessary, rewrite the polynomial in standard form. So that's where we're going to start with number 1. So when you look at number 1, hopefully you can see that it is not in standard form. So remember, standard form, you start with the largest power and you go in descending order. You always end with your constant. So standard form of this polynomial would be 2x squared plus 20x plus 32. And just to remind you, this is something we learned all the way back at the very beginning of chapter 7. When we first introduced polynomials. So let's go ahead and look at step 2. Step 2 is to look to see if we have a GCF, and notice it does say if you have a leading coefficient that is negative, then you have to factor out a -1 first if there's nothing else to take out, okay? So I also want to remind you, this is something we did in section 7.4, so this is not brand new either. In 7.4, we practiced factoring out the greatest common factor. So in this case, hopefully you can see that all 3 factors have a common factor of 2. So we're going to factor out a 2. Remember I said in section 7.4 when we were factoring, don't throw it away. So you have to keep the 2 as a factor. The remaining trinomial is x squared plus 10x plus 16. Okay, so hopefully if you take a look at the remaining trinomial, you can see the advantage of factoring out the greatest common factor is that now what you've ended up with is a trinomial that has a leading coefficient of 1. So we're back to what we did yesterday. So it's a little bit easier. If you can take out that leading coefficient, then it makes it a little bit easier to work with. So from there, these remaining steps are really what we did yesterday. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and put your puzzle pieces in place, just like I taught you yesterday. The only difference is that because we factored out that GCF, we have to keep that there. From here, we're going to read our signs. So this last sign tells me that I want the same signs. So same signs, both positive. So positive, positive. The only way to factor the first term is x and x. And then I need factors of 16 that give me a sum of 10. So think about your factors of 16. 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. Okay, so the only way I can get that sum of 10 is to get 2 and 8. 2 plus 8 is 10. And then just a reminder for step 6 where it says check your work. Just remember you would check it exactly the same way we did yesterday. You can FOIL it back together. The only difference here is once you FOIL the 2 binomials, you have to distribute the 2 back through, or you can distribute the 2 to the first binomial first and then FOIL it. But either way, when you're finished, whatever you have left, your factored form should multiply back together to give you what you started with, okay, or the one below it in standard form. All right, let's go to the second problem here. So in this one, we have a leading coefficient of 8. Again, going back to step 1, I can see that this one is in standard form, so we're good there. Leading coefficient is 8, but when I look at all 3 terms, I can see that there is a greatest common factor of 8, so I can factor that out. So I'm going to take out my 8. 8 factors out, and we're left with x squared minus 7x plus 6. Okay, so once again, we're back to what we did yesterday. We have a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So I'm going to go ahead and factor that into my two binomials, keeping in mind that I don't want to throw that 8 away. So I got to keep that 8. When I read my signs, the last sign tells me that I need the same signs, and this first sign tells me that I want them both to be negative. So same signs, both negatives. The only way I can factor x squared is x and x. So I need factors of 6 that give me a sum of 7. So obviously I have a choice of 6 and 1 or 2 and 3, and I'm looking for 6 and 1. Negative 6x plus negative 1x is negative 7x. So that one checks to give me that middle term. All right, so we're finished with number 2. Let's go to number 3. So in number 3, first of all, I'm going to check to see if it's in standard form, and it is. When I look at this one, I notice that the first term and the last term have a common factor of 6, but not the middle term. So there is no greatest common factor of all 3 terms. So I'm at the point now where I'm factoring ax squared plus bx plus c, meaning I have a leading coefficient and I have to factor this. So if I were to start with my 2 puzzle pieces and just try to factor this, I would be looking up for factors of 6 and factors of 12 that in combination give me a middle term of 1. And you can do this using guess and test, but it's a lot of guesswork. So we're going to use a method today that is called MARF. I know it's a crazy word. MARF rhymes with barf. So if that's helpful to remember it that way, think of that. So this is an acronym, of course. So I'm going to tell you what each of these letters mean and how they'll help us remember the process. So my first step, M, stands for multiply. So I'm going to multiply A times C, so meaning the first term times the last term. So when I multiply, that's my magic number, okay? So when I multiply here, 6 times negative 12 is negative 72. So I just write that right next to it. And I want to keep that number in mind. All right, let's go to our next term. We're done with the M. Let's go to A. Okay, so I want to find, A stands for add, by the way, okay? So I want factors of A times C that add to B. Okay, so in other words, I want to find the product of A and C, and I want those factors to add to my middle term. Okay, so we're looking for factors of 72. Okay, and you can use your signs just like we talked about. Our last sign is negative. Okay, so this means my signs are going to be opposite. You read the signs the same way you did yesterday. The middle term is positive, so that means I'm going to need factors of 72 that when I add them together, the larger one is going to be positive. So again, you can use a factor tree or a T-chart or test and check. What we're looking for here is negative 9 and 8. Okay, my next step is R, and that stands for rewrite. Okay, using the factors. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'll show you what I mean by rewrite it. So we're going to write 6x squared. Our minus 12 still stays there, but I'm going to fill in this middle with the factors that I found. So I said it's going to be negative 9x and positive 8x. Okay, so if you notice, I want these two factors to equal that middle term. So negative 9x plus 8x gives me positive x. So all I'm doing is factoring that. I'm just rewriting that polynomial, but it's still equivalent to what I started with. So I'm good. Okay. All right, stay with me. The last step is the hardest by far, and you might not get it on the first try, so just stay with me. This one is factor by grouping. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I mean by this. This is going to be challenging, so just stay with me. So factor by grouping means you do just that. You're going to group, because we have more than 3 terms now, we're going to group the first 2 together, and we're going to group the last 2 together. Okay, so notice I left that plus sign in between because I'm not multiplying these. I'm not multiplying a binomial times a binomial. I'm still adding all of this stuff together. So I'm not changing the value. I'm just putting some parentheses in there to group things. Okay, now factor by grouping means you group your factors together, and then you factor out the greatest common factor from each of those groups. So when I look at the first binomial, 6x squared minus 9x, I can see that those have a greatest common factor of 3x. So I'm going to divide each term by 3x. Okay, just like I've always said, when we factor, we don't throw it away. So the 3x goes here. And what's left, let's see, 6 divided by 3 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. And then negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. These x's cancel. Okay, let's look at our next binomial. So we have 8x minus 12. It looks like the greatest common factor there is 4. So I'm going to factor out a 4 from each of these terms. So we're taking out a positive 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2x, and then negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. So hopefully you can see, when you look at what's left, can you see that what's inside the parentheses is the same? So our very last step in factor by grouping is to factor out that common factor. Remember, this is a term and this is a term. So we're going to factor out from each term the common factor 2x minus 3. So that factor 2x minus 3, don't throw it away, goes in front. And what's left that we haven't used? 3x plus 4. Okay, so this is my final answer. What's left right here? How do I know for sure that it's my final answer and that it works? Because I can check it. So let's go right over here and let me show you the check. Okay, so when I check it, I have 2x minus 3 and 3x plus 4. So if I FOIL this back together, product of my first is 6x squared. Product of my outers is, let's see, 2 times 4 is 8x. Product of my inners is negative 9x. The product of my 2 last terms, negative 3 times 4, is negative 12. Combine your 2 terms in the middle, and you have 6x squared minus x minus 12. Now watch this. If you notice, that is exactly the same as the trinomial that we started with. Okay, so I know it seems probably pretty confusing. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple more. So using that same step, okay, I'm going to just talk you through these 4 steps that we talked about. So this one, first of all, you can see that it is in standard form. Terms are written least to greatest, or sorry, greatest to least. There is no common factor, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and start by multiplying A times C. So we have 4 times negative 5. So my magic number is negative 20. And then let's go to step 2. Step 2 is to find so I need factors of negative 20, okay, that give me a difference. Remember, my last term is negative, so I need a difference of 19, the larger term being negative. So, and then I'm going to rewrite that, okay? So my first step was to multiply. Now I'm going to add to find those factors. So let me show you how this works. So I have 4x squared My negative 5 goes here, and I need the two factors in the middle here that give me negative 19x. And they have to add up to negative 19 factors of negative 20. So that would be negative 20x and plus 1x. Okay, my next step is to, let's see, we just rewrote it using our factors. So now we're going to factor by grouping. Again, this is the hardest part. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have 4x squared minus 20x. We're going to group that, and then we have 1x minus 5. Greatest common factor of the first set of parentheses looks like 4x. So I'm going to factor out a 4x here, and I'm going to factor out a 4x here. Don't throw it away. Okay, so when you factor that out, 4 divided by 4 is 1, x squared divided by x is x. Negative 20 divided by 4 is negative 5. And then the next set of parentheses doesn't technically have any common factors besides, remember, 1 is a factor of everything. So we're just going to put that 1 in there as a placeholder. And then you can write 1x is the same as x if you want, minus 5. Okay, so again, hopefully you can see when we're looking for common factors, this is a factor and this is a factor. What do they both have in common? X minus 5. So we're going to factor that out. Okay, so x minus 5 is our first factor. What's left up there is 4x plus 1. So this is my final answer. And again, if you multiply that back together and FOIL it, it should give you this trinomial that you started with. Sorry. All right, I'm going to do one more, and then we're going to stop. So let's look at number 5. Number 5 is in standard form. It has a common factor of negative 2. So first step is to factor out a negative 2 from everything, and then write the remaining trinomial. So let's see, 3x squared, that gives me a positive 8x and a negative 3. Okay, so unfortunately I still have a leading coefficient, so I'm going to have to marf it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Looking for my magic number. So to get my magic number, remember I multiply the first and last term. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. That's my magic number. When I go to my next step, don't lose your GCF. Make sure you keep that. And then inside parentheses, we're going to write the first term and the last term. And then in the middle, we're looking for the two factors of negative 9. The subtraction sign at the end tells me that I want the difference of the factors to give me 8. And the larger one needs to be positive. So factors of 9 that give me a difference of 8. The larger positive, it looks like, would be negative 9x and positive 1x. Okay, so again, you can see that this and this are the same. So I didn't change the value at all. So let's go ahead and start, excuse me, factor by grouping. So we would have times 3x squared minus 9x. And then we have over here 1x minus 3. Okay, let's keep going. I'm looking for a GCF of the first set of parentheses. So in the first set of parentheses, it looks like to me there's a 3x in common. Okay, so because I'm going to need to multiply here, and have parentheses, I'm going to use a bracket to help me keep this organized. So 3x, and then I would have x minus, let's see, 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then over here, again, I just have that common factor of 1. So plus 1, and then inside my parentheses, x minus 3. Okay, and then again, oops, I should have closed parenthesis, closed bracket. And then you can see that both of these have the x minus 3 in common, so we're going to factor that out. So again, keeping that negative 2 in front, my common factor of each of these terms, common factor of each term is x minus 3. What is left is the 3x plus 1. Okay, I'm going to end this video by saying I know I probably went through that kind of quickly, and I know that it's confusing. This is hard. So try it, do the best that you can, and we will come back and spend some more time on it tomorrow. Thanks for listening, you guys. Don't hesitate to go back and re-watch anything you need to.